My name was Daniel Walker, and last year I was 18 years old. For most people, 18 means freedom, movement, plans. For me, it meant something very different. It meant 12 years in a wheelchair, 12 years of watching the world move while I stayed still. I don't remember what it feels like to run. I barely remember what it feels like to stand. My body learned stillness before it learned adulthood. People often describe me as quiet. They thought I didn't talk much because I was shy or broken or angry at the world. The truth was simpler. I learned very early that words don't always change anything. Silence became my language. When you live with pain long enough, you stop explaining it. My father's name is Robert Walker. He was 55 last year. He worked at the same steel factory in Pittsburgh since he was 23. 32 years. Same clock, same gate, same metal smell clinging to his clothes when he came home every evening. His hands were always rough, cracked, scarred from lifting things heavier than a human body should lift every day. Those hands pushed my wheelchair everywhere. School, therapy, doctors, grocery stores. He never complained. Not once. But I knew something he never said out loud. Guilt. It lived in his eyes, in the way he avoided certain conversations, in the way he stood too straight when doctors spoke like he was waiting to be judged, in the way he never met my eyes when the past came up. He thought I didn't notice. I noticed everything. When I was 6, I fell. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. The kind of day no one remembers until it ruins everything. There was an old wooden structure in a neighbor's yard. Rotten boards, weak nails. Kids don't see danger the way adults do. I climbed. The wood gave way. I fell nearly 4 meters. My back hit something hard, too hard. The rest of that day exists in fragments. Ambulance lights, hospital ceilings. My father's face. Pale, terrified, trying to be strong. Doctors explaining things in words too big for a child to understand. Spinal cord. Severe damage. Limited options. There was a surgery. Experimental. Expensive. Time-sensitive. We didn't have time. We didn't have money. My father sold everything, his car, his tools, old records that had belonged to his own father. He borrowed, he begged, he worked extra shifts until his body shook from exhaustion. It wasn't enough. The deadline passed. The surgery didn't happen. I survived. But I didn't walk again. From that day on, my father carried something heavier than steel. He carried the belief that he failed me. And no matter how many years passed, that belief never loosened its grip on him. I never blamed him, not once. But I never told him that either. My mother left when I was 2. I don't remember her face clearly. It was always just my father, my grandmother, and me. My grandmother believed deeply in prayer, in patience, in enduring without bitterness. When she died, she left behind many things, but the one thing I kept close was her habit of quiet reflection. She used to say that not every answer comes quickly, and not every miracle arrives loudly. By last year, my father had stopped believing in anything beyond work and survival. I still went to church with him on Christmas Eve, not because of faith, but because tradition is sometimes the only bridge left between two people who don't know how to speak anymore. I didn't know then that the coming Christmas would change everything. I only knew this. I had been still for 12 years, and something inside me was waiting. Christmas Eve always felt heavier than other days, maybe because expectations are louder on holidays. People want joy on a schedule. They want meaning wrapped in lights and music. For me, Christmas Eve had always been quiet, almost suspended, like time slowed down out of respect for something unseen. Last year was no different. Snow had been falling since early afternoon, thick and steady, turning the city white and soft. From my window, I watched the street disappear under layers of silence. My father came home earlier than usual, holiday shift. He moved through the house with the same routine he followed every day, boots off, coat hung, hands washed. Some habits don't change, no matter what breaks inside you. "We'll leave in an hour," he said, not looking at me. I nodded. I already knew. We had gone to the same Christmas Eve service every year since my accident. Not because my father believed anymore, but because he believed in keeping promises. He never said it, but I think he was afraid that if he broke this one tradition, everything else would collapse with it. The drive was slow. Snow clogged the roads, headlights blurred into glowing streaks. I sat in the passenger seat of the adapted van, watching people hurry along sidewalks, scarves pulled tight, faces red from cold. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere important. I wondered how many of them were carrying something they never talked about. The location was different this year. My father hesitated when he parked. He checked the address again, then the building. It was an older structure, plain from the outside. No towering steeple. No stained glass visible from the street. "You sure this is it?" he asked. "That's what the notice said," I replied. Inside, the space felt unfamiliar. Not wrong, just different. The ceiling was higher than I expected. The walls were simple, undecorated. Chairs had been arranged in rows, temporary and out of place, as if they didn't belong to the building itself. Soft lights had been added for the occasion, but they couldn't hide the fact that this place had a different history. I felt it immediately. Some places carry memory. This was one of them. People filled the room slowly. Voices echoed more than usual. Footsteps sounded sharper against the floor. I noticed that there were no statues, no images along the walls. That absence stood out more than any decoration could have. I didn't know why it mattered to me, but it did. My father positioned my wheelchair near the side, giving me a clear view of the front. He stood beside me, arms crossed, shoulders tense. He always looked like he was bracing himself for something, even when nothing was happening. The service began. Music played softly. Familiar words were spoken. I listened by mine, but my attention kept drifting. Something about the room felt unfinished, as if it was waiting to be corrected. Then I saw it. Near the front, close to a recessed space in the wall, there was a book resting on a low stand. It wasn't placed deliberately, not displayed or highlighted. It looked forgotten, left behind. A thick book, dark cover, gold detailing. I didn't know what it was at first. I just knew it didn't belong to the temporary setup around it. It felt anchored, rooted, like it had always been there. My chest tightened. I don't know why my eyes kept returning to it. I tried to focus on the service, on the voices, on the familiar rhythm of the night. But that book pulled at me in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition without understanding. I leaned slightly forward in my chair. "Dad," I said quietly. He leaned down. "What is it?" "That book," I whispered. "Can we go closer?" He followed my gaze, frowned, hesitated. "We can wait until after," he said. I shook my head. "Please." He looked at me for a long moment. I saw the same conflict he always carried. Tiredness, caution, and the inability to say no when my voice sounded like that. "All right," he said finally. He unlocked the wheels and gently pushed me forward. As we moved closer, the noise around us faded. I couldn't hear the music anymore. I couldn't hear the people. All I could feel was the strange certainty growing inside me. I didn't know it yet, but that forgotten book was about to become the center of my life. As my father pushed my wheelchair forward, I became aware of how out of place we looked. People shifted slightly to make room, offering polite smiles, quiet nods. I felt their eyes on me for a moment, then drifting away again. I was used to that. You learn to live with being noticed and ignored at the same time. The closer we got, the clearer the book became. It wasn't resting on a decorative stand. It wasn't displayed like something meant to be admired. It sat there simply, as if it had been placed down for a moment and then forgotten. The cover was dark, worn at the edges, but dignified. Gold patterns traced across it, faded slightly with time. I didn't recognize the language on the front, but something about it felt deliberate, intentional, like every mark meant something. My father slowed. "Daniel," he said quietly, We shouldn't interfere. It probably belongs to someone. I know, I replied. I just want to see it. He stopped beside me. I could tell he was uncomfortable. He had that look again, the one he got whenever something unfamiliar entered our lives. He had learned to trust routines, not unknowns. I leaned forward in my chair. The space around us felt strangely insulated, like the rest of the room had taken a step back without realizing it. Voices continued behind us, music still played, but it all sounded distant now, muffled, as if I were underwater. I reached out slowly. The moment my fingers touched the cover, something unexpected happened. Not outside of me, inside. There was no flash, no sound, no sudden movement. Just a deep, immediate stillness, heavier and calmer than anything I had ever felt. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty. It feels full, complete, like something finally settles into place. My hand didn't shake, I didn't pull back. Instead, I rested my palm fully against the book. I closed my eyes without thinking. Time stopped behaving normally. I don't know how long I stayed like that. A minute? 2? Longer? It didn't matter. The ache I had carried in my body for years faded into the background. Even my legs, those parts of me I'd learned to ignore, felt distant, irrelevant. For the first time in a long time, my body didn't define me. I wasn't praying, at least not in the way I had been taught. I wasn't asking for healing. I wasn't asking to walk. I wasn't even asking questions. I was listening. And somehow I knew that was enough. I became aware of my father beside me. I could feel his tension, his uncertainty. He didn't touch the book. He didn't interrupt me. He just stood there, silent, as if afraid that one wrong move would break whatever was happening. Something warm spread through my chest. Not excitement, not fear, relief, like being told something important without words. When I finally opened my eyes, my father was watching me closely. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded, but I didn't move my hand right away. There was a strange certainty growing inside me, quiet but firm. I didn't understand the book. I didn't know its teachings. I didn't even know how it had ended up there. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity: this book had not been left behind by accident. It had been waiting, not for everyone, for me. I gently lifted my hand and leaned back in my chair. The weight returned to the room. The sounds came rushing back: voices, music, movement. People passed nearby without realizing anything unusual had just occurred. My father exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath without knowing it. "What was that?" he asked, almost to himself. I looked at him, and for the first time in years, the words came easily. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I think something just ended." He frowned. "Ended?" I nodded. "Something I've been carrying." He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't need to. We stayed there for a moment longer, standing beside a book no one claimed, in a building that wasn't supposed to hold it that night. And I had no idea that this was only the beginning. We didn't leave immediately. My father stood beside me, hands clenched, eyes fixed on the floor as if grounding himself. I could feel something shifting between us, something fragile finally cracking after years of pressure. The service continued behind us, but neither of us was really there anymore. My chest felt lighter than it ever had, like a door had been opened somewhere deep inside me and fresh air was finally moving through. I didn't understand what had just happened, but I understood what it had undone. I turned my head and looked up at my father. He looked older in that moment, not because of age, but because he was tired of carrying something alone for too long. His face had the same expression it used to have in hospital corridors: alert, guarded, braced for bad news. I knew that look. I had lived with it for 12 years. "Dad?" I said quietly. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He leaned down immediately. "Yes, son?" I searched for the right words, but they didn't come the way I expected. There was no speech forming in my head, no rehearsed explanation. What came out instead felt like it had already existed before I spoke it, waiting patiently for permission. "You didn't fail me," I said. He froze, his eyes flicked up to mine, sharp and confused. I continued before he could interrupt. "You didn't miss anything. You didn't choose wrong. You did everything you could." His jaw tightened. "Daniel, it was never your fault," I said, more firmly now. "Not then. Not ever." For a second, nothing happened. He just stared at me as if my words hadn't registered yet. Then I saw it, the moment the weight finally hit the ground. His shoulders sagged, just slightly, like a structure giving way after standing too long. He stepped back, then down, lowering himself until he was sitting on the floor beside my chair. Not carefully, not gracefully, just collapsing. People nearby noticed. A few turned their heads. Someone whispered. I didn't care. My father covered his face with his hands, and he cried. Not the quiet kind of crying he used to do late at night when he thought I was asleep. This was different. This was one uncontrolled, years of silence breaking open all at once. His body shook. His breathing came in broken waves. I had never seen him like that. Not when the doctors gave their verdict. Not when bills piled up on the table. Not when he sold the last thing that mattered to him. This was something deeper. This was grief finally realizing it didn't need to pretend anymore. I reached out and rested my hand on his head, the same way he used to do when I was younger, when nightmares woke me in the middle of the night. It's okay, I said. It's really okay. He shook his head, voice breaking. I should have found a way, he whispered. I should have done more. You already did more than anyone, I said. I never needed you to fix me. I just needed you to stay. And you did. His breathing slowed, inch by inch. The crying softened, turning into quiet, exhausted sobs. After a while, he looked up at me. His eyes were red, his face damp, but something had changed. The constant tension I had always seen there, the tightness around his mouth, the guarded distance, was gone. In its place was something unfamiliar. Relief. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. He stood up slowly, wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket, and rested his hand on my shoulder. No words, just presence. We stayed there for a few more moments, side by side, before he turned my chair gently and guided me back toward our place. As we moved away, I glanced back once at the book. It sat exactly where it had been, quiet and unclaimed. But it no longer felt forgotten. It felt finished with its work. I didn't know yet that this night would follow us home. I didn't know that it would change what my body remembered how to do. All I knew was this. Something that had been broken for 12 years had finally been released. We left quietly. No announcement, no explanation to anyone around us. My father simply placed his hand on the back of my chair and guided me toward the exit. The cold air outside hit my face the moment the doors opened, sharp and clean, like it was meant to wake something up. Snow had started falling again, slow and steady, each flake drifting down without urgency. The parking lot lights reflected off the white ground, turning everything soft and unreal. My father helped me into the van the way he always did, careful, practiced, gentle. But something about his movements had changed. He wasn't tense anymore. He wasn't rushing. For the first time in years, he moved like he wasn't afraid of being late for something invisible. The drive home was mostly silent. Not the uncomfortable silence we were used to, the kind filled with things we didn't say. This one felt different. It felt complete. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in a steady rhythm, brushing away the snow as the road stretched ahead of us. Street lights passed like slow, blinking thoughts. I watched my father's reflection in the side window. His face looked calmer, softer, like someone who had finally set something heavy down and was surprised by how light his hands felt afterward. Halfway home, something strange happened. It was subtle. So subtle that at first I thought I imagined it. A faint sensation in my right foot. Not pain, not movement, just awareness. Like when your foot has been asleep for too long and begins to remember itself. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't want to interrupt the fragile peace that had settled between us. I focused on the feeling instead, afraid that acknowledging it would make it disappear. It didn't. By the time we pulled into the garage, the sensation was still there. Light, almost shy, but undeniable. My heart began to race. I had lived with absence for so long that presence felt foreign, almost suspicious. My father turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. "You okay?" he asked. I hesitated, then I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." It wasn't a lie. I was tired, emotionally drained in a way I had never experienced before. He helped me inside, transferred me to the couch, and turned on the lights. The Christmas tree glowed softly in the corner, ornaments reflecting warm colors across the room. Everything looked exactly the same as it had every other year, and yet nothing felt the same. My father went into the kitchen and came back with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He handed one to me and sat beside me on the couch. We didn't talk much at first. We didn't need to. The house felt fuller than usual, as if someone else had joined us without making a sound. After a while, my father spoke. "I've never told you everything about that day," he said. I turned to him. "You don't have to." "I want to," he replied. His voice was steady but careful. He told me about the phone call at the factory, about dropping everything and running, about sitting in a hospital chair staring at a wall while doctors talked in measured tones, about the loan that was denied, about selling things that carried memories, about nights spent staring at the ceiling, calculating numbers that never added up, about the moment he realized time had run out. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't judge. When he finished, he looked at me like he was waiting for a verdict. "You stayed," I said simply. "That's what mattered." He nodded slowly, eyes wet again, but this time he didn't collapse. He breathed through it. We sat there until the hot chocolate cooled and the snow outside thickened. Later that night, when he helped me into bed, the sensation in my foot returned, stronger this time. I stared at the ceiling long after the lights were off, my heart pounding in the dark. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew this night wasn't over. And I knew that whatever had begun in that forgotten space was still moving. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed the same quiet moments over and over. The feel of the book under my hand, my father breaking down beside my chair, the strange calm that had followed us home. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of the heater. Sometime after midnight, I felt it again. That same subtle sensation, deeper this time, spreading through my right foot like a slow current. I focused on it, afraid that moving or reacting would scare it away. I had lived for 12 years with nothing there. No warmth, no pressure, no awareness. And now something was undeniably present. I tried to move my toes. Nothing happened. Not yet. But the sensation didn't disappear either. It lingered, steady and patient, like it wasn't in a hurry. That scared me more than if it had vanished. Hope can be dangerous when you've learned how to survive without it. I lay there staring into the darkness, telling myself not to imagine things, not to build expectations. Still, my heart wouldn't slow down. My body felt awake in a way it hadn't in years, as if some internal system had been quietly switched back on. Morning came slowly. Pale winter light filtered through the curtains. I heard my father moving in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of cabinets opening, a kettle heating. When he came into my room, he paused when he saw my face. "You didn't sleep?" he said. "I felt something," I replied before I could stop myself. He froze. "What do you mean?" "My foot," I said carefully. "The right one. It felt awake." He didn't react right away. I could see the conflict on his face, the instinct to protect himself from disappointment, fighting against the impossible hope rising in his eyes. He had lived too long being careful with belief. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "I'm sure I felt something," I said. "I don't know what it means." We didn't rush to conclusions. We didn't celebrate. We didn't even smile. We treated it like something fragile, something that could break if handled too roughly. That same morning, my father called the clinic and scheduled an appointment. He didn't mention miracles, he didn't say anything dramatic, he just said there had been a change. The tests were familiar, too familiar. I had been through them dozens of times over the years. Same machines, same cold rooms, same controlled questions. But this time, something was different. When the neurologist asked if I felt the light touch on my foot, I said yes. When they tested reflexes, there was a response. Small, minimal, but real. The doctor leaned back in his chair, puzzled. "There's sensory activity where there wasn't before," he said. "It's rare, but not impossible." Rare, not impossible. Those words echoed in my head the entire drive home. Rare meant unlikely. Not impossible meant hope had a place to stand. Physical therapy resumed with a new intensity. The sessions were exhausting, painful. My muscles protested movements they had forgotten how to make. Some days ended with frustration and tears. Other days ended with nothing at all. But the sensation stayed. Slowly, quietly, it grew. My father changed too. He didn't say much about it, but I noticed the way he watched me during exercises, the way his hands shook slightly when I concentrated too hard. I noticed that he started sitting in the living room at night instead of retreating to his room. Sometimes I'd hear him breathing deeply, eyes closed, as if speaking to something he hadn't spoken to in a long time. Weeks passed, then months. Progress came in inches, not leaps. A twitch, a response, a moment of balance. Each one felt like a whisper instead of a shout. But together they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. Something had shifted that night, not just in my body, but in the way time moved around me. I didn't tell anyone outside our home. I didn't post updates. I didn't make announcements. This wasn't a story yet. It was still becoming one. All I knew was that my body had remembered something it had forgotten how to do. And once a memory returns, it doesn't easily let go. The weeks that followed taught me a new kind of patience. Not the patience of waiting for bad news, which I had mastered long ago, but the patience of allowing something good to unfold without trying to control it. Progress didn't arrive like a sudden sunrise. It came like dawn in winter. Slow, uncertain, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Physical therapy became part of my routine again, but this time it felt different. Before, it had always been about maintaining what little I had left, about preventing things from getting worse. Now it felt like an invitation. The therapists didn't promise anything. They were careful with their words, cautious with their expressions. But they couldn't hide the shift in their tone. They asked me to try things they hadn't asked me to try in years. They watched my legs more closely. They repeated tests just to be sure they hadn't imagined the results. Some days were brutal. My muscles burned. My body resisted commands it barely remembered. There were moments when frustration rose so fast it almost choked me. On those days, my father would sit quietly nearby, never pushing, never interrupting. He had learned, like I had, that forcing things only made them retreat. Other days surprised me. A toe moved when I asked it to. A muscle tightened in response to effort. A reflex appeared where there had been none. Each small change felt enormous, not because of what it was, but because of what it suggested. Possibility. At home, life settled into a new rhythm. Mornings were for exercises, afternoons for rest, evenings for quiet. My father began cooking again instead of bringing home frozen meals. He played old music sometimes, the kind he used to listen to before everything changed. I noticed that he slept better. The lines on his face softened. It was as if the night he had finally let go of his guilt had given his body permission to breathe again. And then there was the book. I didn't talk about it. I didn't ask questions out loud, but I thought about it constantly. The weight of it, the calm that had followed my touch, the certainty that had settled in me without explanation. I found myself replaying that moment in my mind, not searching for answers, but revisiting the feeling. It didn't feel like memory, it felt like a reminder. One evening, while my father was out buying groceries, I searched online. I typed simple words, careful words. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. I read about different scriptures, different traditions, different ways people described encounters with something greater than themselves. I wasn't comparing, I wasn't choosing, I was listening again the same way I had that night. I closed the laptop feeling strangely grounded. At therapy the next week, something happened that changed the way everyone in the room looked at me. I was positioned between parallel bars, hands gripping tightly, legs braced by supports. The therapist asked me to shift my weight forward. I did. My legs trembled violently, protesting the unfamiliar demand. Sweat rolled down my back. My arms carried most of the load, but for a brief moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4, I was upright. Standing, not balanced, not graceful, but standing. The room went silent. The therapist didn't cheer. She didn't clap. She simply said, "Okay, that's enough for today." But her eyes were wet. My father covered his mouth with his hand and turned away, shoulders shaking. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was too focused on staying present in my own body, on memorizing what standing felt like. That night, lying in bed, muscles aching, I felt something else alongside the pain. Gratitude. Not directed at a person, not attached to a label, just gratitude, raw and undeniable. I whispered a thank you into the darkness without knowing exactly who I was speaking to. It didn't matter, the words felt right. I still didn't call it a miracle. I didn't know what to call it yet. I only knew that whatever had begun in that quiet space had not stopped moving. It was patient, steady, and it wasn't finished with me. For the first time since I was 6 years old, the future didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a door. Something shifted inside me after that first time standing. Not in a dramatic way, no sudden certainty, no loud realization, but in a quieter, deeper sense. For years, questions had felt like threats. Every why carried the risk of disappointment. Every what if opened the door to hope, and hope had always been followed by loss. Now the questions returned, but they didn't feel sharp anymore. They felt honest. I began paying attention to details I had ignored before. The way my breath settled when I focused. The way my body responded when my mind stopped fighting it. The way my father watched me when he thought I wasn't looking, as if he was seeing me for the first time again. There was a gentleness in our home that hadn't existed before. We spoke more, but we didn't fill the space just to avoid silence. Silence had become safe. Therapy continued. Standing turned into controlled weight shifts. Weight shifts turned into assisted steps between the bars. Each session demanded everything I had. There were setbacks too, days when my legs refused to cooperate, days when exhaustion flattened me completely. But the setbacks didn't erase what had already happened. They just reminded me that whatever was unfolding followed its own pace. At night, when the house was quiet, my thoughts returned to that book. I didn't talk about it with my father. Not yet. I wasn't ready to name it out loud. But it felt present in my life, not as an object, but as a point of orientation, like a compass I hadn't known I was carrying. I started reading more, carefully, slowly, not with the intention of changing anything, but with the need to understand what had touched me. I didn't feel pulled away from who I was. I felt pulled deeper into something I had barely begun to notice. The language I encountered spoke about surrender, about patience, about mercy not as a reward but as a constant. It didn't argue with me, it didn't demand. It waited. That waiting felt familiar. My father noticed the changes before I said anything. One evening, as he helped me stretch after a long session, he paused and looked at me. "You're different," he said. It wasn't an accusation, it wasn't concern. It was curiosity. "I feel different," I replied. He nodded as if that made sense. "You're calmer." I thought about that. He was right. The urgency that used to live in my chest, the constant need to brace for disappointment, had eased. In its place was something steadier. Not certainty, trust. The next milestone came unexpectedly. I took my first step without the bars. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't strong. My therapist stood close, my father even closer. My knees shook, my balance wavered, but my foot moved forward, touched the ground, and held. One step, then another. Assisted, supported, imperfect. But mine. I laughed before I realized I was laughing. My father laughed too, a sound I hadn't heard from him in years. For a moment, the room felt lighter than air. That night, as I lay in bed, muscles aching, heart full, I felt the need to speak. Really speak, for the first time since everything began. Not to explain, not to ask, just to acknowledge. "I'm listening," I whispered. The words felt right. They settled instead of echoing. I didn't know where this path would lead. I didn't know what it would ask of me. I only knew that I wasn't being dragged or pushed. I was being invited. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to accept an invitation whose destination I couldn't see. Healing had begun in my body, but something else was healing too. Something deeper, quieter, harder to name. I didn't rush to define it. I let it grow the way my steps were growing, slowly, honestly, one movement at a time. Whatever came next, I knew this much with certainty. I wasn't walking alone anymore. By the time this year arrived, my body no longer felt like a stranger. It still surprised me sometimes, how a leg responded when I asked it to move, how balance returned in quiet increments. But the fear that once followed every improvement was gone. I walked now. Not perfectly, not without effort, but on my own. Each step carried memory with it. The years of stillness, the nights of doubt, the moment everything began to change. I didn't try to forget any of it. Forgetting felt dishonest. I wanted to carry it all with me. People around us noticed before we said anything publicly. Neighbors paused longer in conversations. Therapists smiled more openly. Doctors used careful language, but their eyes gave them away. They called it unexpected recovery, rare progression, anomalous improvement. I listened politely and nodded. Their words weren't wrong, they just weren't complete. Inside me, something else had been happening alongside the physical healing. The questions I once avoided had settled into clarity. I didn't feel torn or confused, I felt aligned. The calm that first arrived the night I touched that forgotten book had never left. It had deepened, shaped my days, softened my nights. It asked for honesty, not performance. One evening, I told my father I needed to speak to him. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where unpaid bills used to pile up, where silence used to stretch uncomfortably between us. This time, the silence felt steady, supportive. "I know what that book was," I said. He didn't interrupt. He waited. "I've been reading," I continued, "listening, thinking, and I need you to know, what happened to me didn't just heal my body." He looked at me carefully. "You're saying it changed you?" "Yes," I said. "Completely." He exhaled slowly. Then he surprised me. "I think it changed me too," he said. "I just didn't know how to say it." That was the night we spoke honestly about faith for the first time. Not about labels, not about arguments, about surrender, about letting go of guilt, about trusting something greater than our understanding. There were no dramatic declarations, no pressure, just truth, shared openly. Weeks later, I made a decision I had already made in my heart. I embraced Islam. I didn't do it impulsively. I didn't do it to explain my recovery. I did it because the message I encountered asked me to live with responsibility, humility, and awareness. It didn't promise ease, it promised purpose. I took a new name, Yusuf, not to erase who I had been, but to mark who I was becoming. My father chose his own path shortly after. Watching him find peace was its own miracle. This year, on the same date when everything had begun, I was invited to speak. I stood in front of people without support, without a walker, without fear of falling. My legs held me, my voice held steady. I told them my story myself, not through doctor's notes, not through speculation, through memory. I was still for 12 years, I said, not just in my body, but in my heart. Last year, in a place that wasn't meant to hold what it held that night, I touched a book that wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't ask for healing. I listened, and something answered. The room was silent. I didn't rush, I didn't dramatize, I didn't claim ownership of what had happened. I'm walking today, I continued, but that's not the point. The point is that I learned how to let go of blame, of fear, of the belief that pain defines the end of a story. I saw faces change, some cried, some looked skeptical. That was fine. I wasn't there to convince anyone. I was there to testify. Afterward, my father stood beside me, hand on my shoulder. He didn't need to say anything. His presence said enough. This year, I wasn't being carried into a space by someone else. I walked in on my own, and for the first time, I knew exactly why. When people ask me how it happened, I pause before answering. Not because I don't have words, but because I've learned that the wrong words can shrink the truth. Some want a formula, some want proof. Some want a timeline they can control. I don't give them any of that. I give them what I know. I know that last year I was carried into a place I didn't understand, holding questions I didn't dare ask. I know that I touched something that did not argue with me, did not impress me, did not perform for me. It simply was. And in that presence, something I had carried for 12 years, fear, guilt, anger that wasn't even mine, finally loosened its grip. Healing didn't rush in like a storm. It arrived like permission. I also know that healing is not a straight line. Even now, my body has days when it reminds me where I came from. There are mornings when stiffness lingers, when balance takes effort, when I have to slow myself down and listen again. I don't resent those days. They keep me honest. They remind me that recovery is not a trophy you win once. It's a responsibility you carry forward. People often focus on my legs. They want to talk about walking, standing, steps. I understand why. Those are visible things, but the real change happened somewhere deeper, in a place no scan could ever show. The real change was learning how to release what was never meant to be carried alone. When my father let go of his guilt, something in me followed. When I stopped measuring my worth by what my body could do, my body began to respond differently. I don't claim ownership over what happened to me. I don't call it my miracle. If anything, it taught me humility. Whatever healed me did not belong to me, and it didn't need my permission to work. It asked only that I be present, that I listen, that I stop fighting the quiet. My father and I talk differently now. Not louder, not more often, just more honestly. We don't circle the past anymore. We acknowledge it and move forward. He no longer wakes up braced for judgment. I no longer wake up braced for disappointment. Our home feels lighter, not because everything is easy, but because nothing is hidden. This year, when I stood and told my story, I wasn't trying to persuade anyone. I wasn't trying to create believers. I was standing as evidence that change is not limited to what we expect. That answers don't always come in the language we're used to. That sometimes guidance arrives quietly, waits patiently, and leaves the rest to us. If you're listening to this and carrying something heavy, blame, regret, a question you've buried because it hurts too much, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not late. You have not missed your moment. Some doors open only when we stop pounding on them and learn how to stand still. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't need to. I've learned that certainty is overrated and trust is stronger than fear. I wake up each day grateful not just that I can walk, but that I can walk without resentment, without bitterness, without the need to explain myself to the past. My name was Daniel. Now it is Yusuf. And this is not the end of my story. It is the beginning of how I live it, step by step, with awareness, with gratitude, and with a quiet certainty that what is meant for us will find us, even in places it was never supposed to be.